Hello and welcome to the training video. In this video we'll be covering the basic topics you'll need to know to get your first meter tuned. Just to recap what we were talking about in the metrics tour, tuning is the process of creating your baseline. Before you even start tuning, there's a couple things you're going to need. The first is a year of data from your meter. The second thing you'll need is weather data that covers that same year. Once you've got those two things, you can start tuning. As you'd expect, tuning takes place on the Tuning tab. I'm going to zoom in on the tuning window itself and ignore the tree structure here to get a bit of a better view on this. For this project, I've got a few years of data, and I'm interested in tuning to my first year. I'm going to scroll up here on the left in my bill register and see where I'm tuning to. Right now it's set to 18 bills starting at the first period, and I'm tuning demand. I don't really want to be tuning demand right now, so I'll uncheck that and look at consumption. So it's still set to 18 and 1. I'm going to change this to 12 bills starting on the 1st. Before we go on, there's a couple things to notice. The first are these dates here, which are the start and end date of your tuning period. It's about a year, which is what we're looking for. The next thing to look at here is that I'm tuning my on-peak usage, and I'm not tuning demand. These two boxes aren't checked right now. If you were to click them, it would show you your usage per day, as well as the degree days associated with each billing period. I'm going to leave those unchecked as you're usually only going to need to look at those after you're done tuning. Now that I'm sure that I've got the right period in consumption, not demand, let's look at our data on a few different graphs. The first one you'll see is time, which is just your data put on a time axis. The most useful one in my opinion is this outdoor temperature graph, which gives you a pretty good indication of how your meter is going to tune. Our meter is increasing fairly linearly with temperature, indicating that it's probably going to be a cooling trend. So now that we've got an idea of what our meter is going to tune to, we can click Auto Tune. I let it override my build deselection, which is generally a pretty standard thing to do. As we can see, like we expected, I've got a cooling degree day trend with a base balance point of about 55 degrees. There's a couple things to look at to make sure this is a good tune. The first thing is the balance point. 55 might be a little low for cooling, which might indicate that your facility is cooling more often or at a lower temperature than you might want. The next is this regression coefficient. It's positive, which is a good thing. And also the base load is positive. You might occasionally get a negative base load. You're probably always going to want a positive one just for physical realistic reasons. These statistical indicators on the right look really good. The CVR MSE needs to be less than 25. The R-squared value is 0.955, which indicates a pretty strong linear fit, and the bias percent is forced to 0 from what we set in the Project Preferences tab. Looking down here, you can see your regression equation, and that's about all you need to do to check. Overall, this is a pretty good tune, but of course this was a very easy tune. One thing you'll see right now is that our meter still has a red X here, which seems to say that it's not tuned yet. Well, one thing to check is whether or not you've tuned demand yet. So I click this demand box, and you'll see that no, I haven't actually tuned demand either. So we'll go through the same auto-tune process, and auto-tune demand, and now that's tuned. We still have this red X though, so one thing we need to check is go into the register, and you'll see we have two consumption time of use periods, but the off-peak distribution doesn't actually have any data in it. Usually this can happen if you've entered a time of use period by accident, so we're just going to get rid of that down to 1. It's going to warn you that once the data is removed you can't get it back, so we'll delete it. And now we've got that green check that we wanted, indicating that the meter is completely tuned. If you did have a time of use period, but you only wanted to tune the sum of the two, you could set that in the Project Preferences tab like we talked about in the last video. Or you could tune each time of use period separately and come up with different tuning equations for each. Now that your meter is tuned, you can get a first glimpse of what your savings might look like in the Scenario Inspection tab. So I click over here, and I've got all of my bills for consumption listed down on the left. If I scroll up, my tuning period is in gray and bolded like it is in the Tuning tab, and if I select a bill, it's going to be highlighted on the graph. So what we're looking at now is just our base here. If we wanted to see all of our data, a quick way to do that is to go here to that number of bills and select a pretty large number, and metrics will automatically drop that down to how many bills you have. If you look at this graph, you can see that the first 12 months match pretty closely, and that's a good thing because that's our tuning period. We want that to match as closely as possible. After that, if you want to be looking for savings, you want to be seeing the green line above the black line. This green line again is your baseline, and a positive difference between the two indicates that you've been saving energy. Down here it's slightly negative, which is something we don't want, but if you look over here we've got some large positive savings, indicating that our new equipment that was installed around here is working properly. The last thing to be aware of for tuning is bill matching. The primary use of bill matching is for when there's not a very good trend in your data. What bill matching is going to do is it basically creates a month-to-month comparison with your bills. Effectively, you're just comparing the per day usage of each bill to its corresponding time period in the base year. Other uses of bill matching do exist, and you can find more information on that in the user manual. For now, this should be enough to tune the majority of your meters.